Good morning, everyone. For those of you who are returning to what was Coffee and Conversations, welcome back. And for those folks who are joining for the first time, welcome to Opportunity Makers. This is still about having a great conversation with a cup of coffee this morning. But one thing that I noticed as I was reflecting this summer was that every single one of my guests really is an opportunity maker. These are people who are pivoting when everything looks bleak in a pandemic. These are folks who are looking at the world in a new way. It is an absolutely fantastic lineup that I believe that we have had throughout last year. And I'm really, really happy to be here again this year, sharing more great guests with you and having fantastic conversations. So this morning, we are going to start off on the right foot with my guest, Charlie Garland. Charlie is an opportunity maker. He has a thriving business called the Innovation Habit. We're going to talk a little bit about his business and the kind of work that he does with his clients. But we're also going to talk about something else that he's doing that I think is absolutely fantastic, which is he's writing a book, not really related to the business that he's doing. But I want to talk about the process of writing a book and what it takes when you are a very busy business owner to say, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And I think the topic of his book, Beautiful Women, A View from the Heart, is really worth talking about as well. So without further ado, I want to welcome Charlie. Welcome.
Good
Thank you
morning, Libby. How are
for
you?
being here. I'm great. How are you?
Doing wonderfly. Thank you.
That's good. So we're also in a new time slot, Monday morning. So happy post weekend. Happy Monday. You see, it's Monday. I might have a problem here. It's too early already. So Charlie, I have to tell the story of how you and I met. You and
Sure.
I both work with BJ Fogg.
Hmm.
We are both tiny habit coaches. For anybody on the call who does not have a copy of Tiny Habits, you absolutely must get this, read it, work with it. We also have studied under BJ with his behavior design boot camp. And we were on a call with BJ. So it's fantastic studying with him and working with him because we get to interact with him on a monthly basis. And I was late for the call a couple of months ago, and you were talking. And I thought, who is this guy? Who is this guy who runs this business, who's writing this book? So I looked you up on LinkedIn, we connected, and we started to have that conversation. So I'm always sorry when I'm late for a call with BJ, but I was so glad that I made it to that call because otherwise I wouldn't necessarily have met you.
Better late than never.
Better late than never. Yes. When did you start studying with BJ?
I believe it was 2016.
Wow.
That's when I first heard about him. He was recommended to me by someone who I met at a speaker at a healthcare conference who was talking about a subject that I found to be really intriguing. It was about habits and behaviors and things in the healthcare industry. And what she had said, and she's someone who studied under BJ at Stanford University.
Mhm.
So I went up to her after the event. And I said, look, I just have to say I was fascinated by what you were talking about. Where can I learn more about this? And the first name she said was, well, there's this fellow named BJ Fogg at Stanford who, if you can get a hold of him, you really ought to pursue it.
Yeah.
That's how it started.
Oh, that's fantastic. So 2016, gosh, I only started working with him toward the end of last year.
Mm.
So I'm a newbie. Now, you and I both work with habit and
Mm.
behavior design, but in very different ways. I use it more productivity for salespeople. I have shifted from, learning objectives to behavior design,
Mm.
much more in the work that I do. But you really are at the heart of behavior design when it comes to innovation. So I want people to understand a little bit about the business that you operate, the innovation habit, and creating innovation as a reliable habit for growth in
Sure.
organizations.
Hmm. So the way that I think about innovation and I define innovation, not only for myself, but I use the definition of innovation as a means of teaching people to introduce them to what innovation is. I have found over the years of consulting, especially in training, that people think most commonly about innovation as the thing at the end of the process that is that bright shiny object,
Mm.
right? The wonderful uh, mobile phone, the digital gadget, the great pharmaceutical, the automobile, the whatever it might be, that's some piece of technology perhaps that is the innovation. And that tends to dominate the thinking about people, or of people. And what I find is much less commonly known is the process that leads up to that. And of course, that
Mhm.
process involves changing of behaviors, doing things differently so that you come out with, and doing things together in coordination with other people. But at the very front end of that, the very beginning of that process, is a change in your attitudes and your thinking and your
Mhm.
assumptions. And so it's really that's what precedes. That's kind of the root cause of this wonderful thing or result at the end of the process. And I try to define it in terms of the fact that it is a process and not just a product. So that's the first step. And so that brings me more to focusing on habits related to thinking as opposed to habits related to just doing and behavior.
And oh gosh, that's so important and relevant. Um, Too often we try to get people to do things,
Hmm.
in a sales environment, which I'm most comfortable in. We line up the stars of the company on stage at conferences and whatnot, and we say, share your best practices. And
Hmm.
then think that everybody in the room, because they now know what the star does, that they can go do that too.
Hmm.
And yet it doesn't really move the needle. It doesn't change. And people say, well, that's not me. That's not how I do things. But
Hmm.
nobody ever asks, what is the star thinking?
Hmm.
How does the star
Yeah.
think? I think
Hmm.
the thinking is the foundation to get
Hmm.
anything done.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's part of the challenge, is that in life, what we observe, what we're able to see, is what dominates what we think about. Same thing with a bright shiny object. So
Hmm.
when we can observe what people are doing, their physical behaviors, or even the fact that they've said something or typed something in an email, their communication, that's observable because you can verify that that's happening. It's almost not really impossible, but it's very, very hard to figure out what they're doing inside their head.
Hmm.
But thinking is a behavior.
Yeah.
And this is something I've talked deeply and intimately with BJ about, because he after all, is a doctorate in psychology. That's really where all of his research has been drawn from, as well as experimenting. But it's understanding that our thinking process is something that we can change, just like we can change whether we put one foot in front of the other, or whether we take a deep breath before we do whatever we do, or whether we are calm when we speak. Those are all observable things, but the things that are less observable are the bigger challenge. And for better or for worse, I tend to focus on the more challenging aspects of applying behavior design and behavior change to the thinking part. And that requires a little extra work. It requires
Hmm.
that you address and have communications with an individual that says, well, now let's make sure that you're being conscious about what you're thinking and realize what it is that's going on in your head, because there's a tremendous amount of what's going on in our head that we're not conscious of all the time. We have a
Hmm.
very huge portion of what's going on in our brain that's kind of operating in the background, like a computer in the
Hmm.
background. It's going on in our subconscious mind. And I guess if you ask us, yeah, I was thinking that, but we're not always, it's not always front of mind. There's only so many things you can keep front of mind or top of mind.
Yeah.
And those are the things that are a lot more obvious. Anyway, that's kind of part of the challenge of where I'm dealing with innovation thinking and creative thinking.
And I think the other is this idea that there's a default. There's a default setting.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
keep going back to the same ideas to solve old problems. We don't really understand how to look at something with fresh eyes. Now, you
Hmm.
and I, just before we went live, I want to spend time to talk about your book, but I just
Hmm.
want to go a little bit deeper here first. We were talking about cognitive bias.
Hmm. Yes.
And how much that is just our autopilot, right? And we
Hmm.
just keep churning away. And
Hmm.
until we create some awareness, I see a comment Carl Dennis has written, monkey see, monkey do. We're going to monkey see, monkey do until we can figure out that maybe that's not the path that's going to lead us to the
Hmm.
best result. So, um, anyway, just touch on the impact of our cognitive bias in the work that you do and how you move people past that.
Hmm. Yes, thank you. So, cognitive bias is something that affects every human being, and it's not always a bad thing. Cognitive biases are the way they are because it makes your thinking a bit more efficient. It
Mhm,
helps to have rules of thumb. It helps to draw generalizations about the world because otherwise we'd have to be thinking in this extremely detailed, laborious fashion 24/7, and that just doesn't work in terms of
mhm,
surviving. You have to kind of make assumptions and you have to kind of have biases that basically says, "Oh, I've seen that thing before, that snake or that saber-toothed tiger. I know to run away from it, or I know to hide, or I know to just stand still because I've seen my friends get killed." So there are biases that are helpful,
mhm,
and there are biases that are not helpful. So it comes from to helping people to A, understand that everyone has biases, B, let them know what those biases are in terms of how your brain adapts to the world and filters out the noise and all the detail sometimes, but also that there are different types of biases that they will wind up being familiar with when they hear about confirmation bias or my side bias or availability bias. And all these are, you can look them up in Wikipedia. There's a list of
mhm,
hundreds of different types of biases. So biases are not inherently bad. They're problematic, or they can be problematic like anything else when you're not conscious of them. And unfortunately, most of us are not conscious of them pretty much all the time.
yeah.
It's very rare. So it really is important to fundamentally help people understand what biases are, that they are affecting us all the time, and how they can affect us, so that people can think humbly in their own life. It's like, yeah, I have made that mistake before, and that does sound familiar. And yeah, that's kind of the way I think because I'm under so much pressure. I have to kind of think quickly all the time. Anyway,
Mhm.
I give people a basic background, and that really is what helps to have them, put it in the right context.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about understanding.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we've got you running this busy business. You're
Hmm.
working with global organizations. You're helping bring innovation in and creating it as habit for these organizations that you're working with. And
Yep.
then light bulb goes on one day. I don't know what happens. And you say, I'm going to write a book. And not
Well.
about innovation. The name of
Hmm.
the book is Beautiful Women, A View from the Heart. So I want to talk about two things. I want to understand what the book is about because I think it's
Hmm.
such a beautiful story
Hmm.
to tell, but also like how did you, of course, you're a habiteer, but how did you set yourself up to be able to write a book in the middle of a busy business?
Great questions, and you've really unloaded a lot of a lot of thoughts. First and foremost, let me make a correction in what you said, and it's a subtle correction, but kind of important in that it didn't just dawn on me. I've been thinking about this for a long time. But what really has help push me over the edge to make the behavior happen, to make that decision, is to look out into the world and just become so overly overwhelmed and frustrated with what I see going on around me in the world in terms of polarization and division and outright hatred of people of each other, very much along political lines, but also along economic and social and any other kind of dimension of life that you can imagine. We're so divided and so absurdly so,
Mhm.
that it's frustrating, and it just, you can keep thinking about it in a frustrated way, or you can start thinking more innovatively and more open-mindedly and think, how might we really resolve this? And one of the ways that I thought about it was, um, I think about the I forget about that stress of the polarization for a minute, and I think about what are all the good, beautiful things in my life. And it dawned on me that I have been inspired by women over and over and over again. Most importantly, probably my mom, but it's also my mother's mother and one of my sisters in particular. And now I became a father earlier this year. So I have a baby girl.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Who I regard as a beautiful woman to be. And in a very unique and a very different sense, having that little baby girl and holding her in my arms when she was 2 days old, all by myself with my wife asleep finally after labor and resting in the hospital bed, and just that moment of silence and that moment of connection and realization that I have this beautiful baby. I wasn't thinking about beautiful future woman at the time, but this beautiful baby, and it's just it sort of inspired a change in me and a change in thinking. And I thought, this is the kind of thing that stops people in their tracks. This level of connection to love and to affection and to the important things in life. And it also impressed me that, you know what, this is the kind of thing that we do have commonalities. Even if you're conservative versus liberal, or you voted for Biden or you voted for Trump, there are still commonalities that bring us together much more so and more powerfully than those things that pull us apart.
Mm,
And so that became the way for me to say, not only do I have this child in my life who I am dedicated to taking care of for the rest of her life, rest of mine at least, but that became the realization that these values of love are, they transcend the
mm,
more petty things that tend to get in our way, that tend to divide us, that tend to polarize us against each other. And focusing on that felt to me to be an extremely powerful way of getting people to focus on the right things and not on the wrong things, to
mm,
focus on what does bring us together as opposed to what divides us. And so that really is what inspired me to not necessarily do it, but to do it now and to put this together. And I was lucky enough to find a program. Ironic, I won't go into the detail, but there was a prior author, a woman who wrote about innovation, which is unfortunately rare. And I became good friends with this woman because I love the book that she wrote. She told me about the program that she happened to encounter, and she used this program, which is an online publishing program at a university. It happens to be Georgetown University. And she said, "Look, you can do this part time. You can still work, and you can do the book part time." And I said, "That's fabulous. Let me look into it." So one thing led to another, and I'm part of this, and extremely, extremely happy with it. And it's been a great learning experience. I could write a separate book just about the whole process of learning and writing the book and the experiences that I've had from hearing these stories, some of which have literally brought me to tears. And
mhm.
it's quite a powerful event.
And the book will be a series of stories, correct?
That's the vision I have. Yes, it
Mhm,
will be a series of stories. Yes, so it'll be a collection of each story about a beautiful woman is told to me by the person who that beautiful woman inspired. So in other words, if I were asking you to tell me the story, Libby, about a beautiful woman in your life who inspired you to do something wonderful, great, transformative, um, then there would be sort of there are actually three or four people, players in that scenario. There's me, the writer, There's you, the
Mhm.
storyteller. There's the beautiful woman you're talking about, and then of course there's the reader enjoying the story that's put down in the page. And so I'm arranging these stories in terms of the types of values that come forth
Mm.
and the effect that the inspiration has on the storyteller, and then what that storyteller has as an intention to do with that inspiration to better the world, to help mend what I to inspiring stories to help mend a torn world is really the subtitle.
Yeah, I love it. And was going to say this to the closing, but you're still looking for stories, correct?
I am, yeah. I've got probably about 2/3 of the number of stories that I want to write. I've got probably another half a dozen or maybe as many as 10 different additional stories that I would like to write that I'm in the process of reaching out to folks. So certainly, if there's anyone in your audience who says, wow, I have a beautiful woman in mind, or maybe even I am that beautiful woman, and you're perhaps a bit too humble to come right out and say, um, I want you to put that humility aside for a second. And if you really do think that you've inspired someone and that person is taking that inspiration forward and doing something lovely in the world with it, great. I'd love to hear that story. Let's get on the phone. And I don't want you to necessarily tell your own story, but if you want to bring in someone else who could tell the story for you, or if you want to tell the story about a woman who inspired you, and it seems consistent with the kind of theme that I described, I would love to have a conversation. So I invite you to reach out, or reach out to
Fantastic.
Libby, most likely.
Yeah, so DM me, and we'll do a follow up. This goes into replay, and we'll do a separate post that gives your contact information, at
Hmm.
least to my network, because your network, I'm sure, is
Terrific.
already aware. And put in the comments if just off the top, whether or not you're going to reach out to Charlie. Do you have a woman in your life who has inspired you? And I can unequivocally say yes. And I would probably choose my mother. And there are a couple of other women who have truly inspired me to
Hmm.
become the person that I am, including some great bosses that I've had, and some friends and my sister. So the list goes on. So if you're out there and you want to put a comment, just a thumbs up or a yes, that would be fantastic. Um,
Wonderful.
so just a little on the process then. So you're taking a course, which is great.
Hmm.
There is nothing better than having the discipline of knowing that you're showing up somewhere. Although this is online, correct?
It is, yes.
An online course.
Yep.
But so just talk about how you fit in to your busy schedule, the writing, and what does that process look like for you? And I get that it might look different for different
Hmm.
people,
Hmm.
but what does it look like for you?
Well, they're very good about having the a number of different times when you can join the online live lectures,
Mhm.
but they supplement that with offline. Come as you'd like, whenever you want, access these documents, read these instructions that we sort of went over, and then follow the instructions step by step. And they make it very easy. It's almost like painting by numbers. Um, but they have a main professor. They have a number of assistant professors who are experienced authors. They also have a whole cadre of editors who work with you one on one. So, out of, let's say, 50 or 60 authors, and most of us are first time authors, but several are second or third time authors. And they all say that they love the process because
Mm.
they wish they had this the first time they went through. It would have been so much faster, so much easier. And so they really guide you along the way. And the things that you might think about, like I thought about before I started writing my book, was how am I going to do this? How can I take this fuzzy ideas and these thoughts and maybe even a few little snippets that I may have written down on some, back of some napkin at some point? how can I turn that into something that looks beautiful on a page in a book and flows like the wonderful stories that I read?
Mhm.
How could I ever do that? And that was where I was thinking beforehand. And I didn't realize, my goodness, there is a methodology to doing that. And they give you a step by step that just sort of takes you baby steps, one little graduation at a time, a little, very easy, but then a little bit more complicated, a little more complicated. And you build up and you learn that you can do it. You can do it very well. So what I thought was like, I could never do that was, I'm doing this, and yes, I can do it because they really give you a wonderful way to sort of follow a process
That's
that you just don't know
fantastic.
about otherwise. Yeah.
I looked into the program that you were talking about at Georgetown a few weeks back.
Hmm.
I don't think I'm ready yet, but it's and I'm not exactly sure what I have in me. I think
Hmm.
people have, you hear this expression, "I have a book in me," uh,
Oh yeah.
and and maybe that's something that has just you've reflected on for a really long time, like what you've been doing with this idea, and what's the opposite of being polarized, what pulls us together, uh,
Hmm.
and brings us together in love, which I uh, just admire so much. Um, but it's great to know that there are these processes out there, because otherwise it is this sort of overwhelming, let me sit down and see if I can figure this out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's an example of a cognitive bias, isn't it? One of the greatest cognitive biases that humans experience is we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
Or more technically speaking, it's called unconscious incompetence. We're
Yeah.
just not familiar with things that we should know or that we could know that would help us that
Yeah.
are there, but we're just not aware of them because you can't be thinking about everything in the world all the time. But there's
Yeah.
stuff out there and there's stuff worth discovering. So don't let that cognitive bias prevent you from moving forward.
Hmm.
Have enough curiosity to go out there and stick your neck out and look around and be curious and don't just sort of sit in your comfort zone and stay with what you know. Get,
Right.
create some stretch goals for yourself.
Yeah. What is the timeline, or do you have a timeline yet?
Well, yeah, the timeline that they have is, and they have their own publisher that they work with, and so they do they help you with designing your marketing campaign and doing it early and doing it with social media and you leveraging what you already have as far as your contacts and friends on Facebook and that sort of thing. The process where the editors will take us, so the formal program really takes us right through delivering us writing and delivering a solid first draft of the manuscript. From
Mhm.
there, they sort of transition us over to their partners at the publishing house, and then the publishers have their own set of editors that take us through the rewrites and the edits and the let's tweak this and let's change that and let's add this and then all the kind of the more the fun stuff like choosing a cover and using sort of a design template and things like that and all the little kind of forward and acknowledgments and all those things get added on later but that's quite frankly the easy stuff. The hard
Yeah.
stuff is getting the core message across, the core story or set of stories together in a cohesive fashion, and that's really the importance of that first draft. And
Mhm.
that's really they pull you right up to that point, but very comfortably. And so probably next April or May is when the most likely target publishing date would be,
Okay.
where it would actually be not just published but printed and available for sale.
Wow. Well, we will all be keeping our eyes open for that.
Terrific.
So I can't believe a half an hour has gone by already. I want to leave people with your contact information. So
Hmm.
obviously your business, the innovationhabit.com. Is it .com
Hmm.
or .biz?
.com it is. Yep.
.com.
.com.
And your
The
email is
theinnovationhabit.com. Yes.
theinnovationhabit.com. C. Garland at innovationoutlet.biz. You're also on LinkedIn, so very easy to find.
Hmm.
I think most people know me as the host of the show. Charlie, this has been such a treat. You are the inaugural guest of Opportunity Makers, and you are an opportunity maker. So
Oh, thank
thank
you.
you so, so very much for being here.
I loved it, Libby, and I appreciate it. This has been
Great.
enjoyable for me.
Wonderful. We are not on next Monday, but I will be posting our guest, another student of BJ Fogg. Is coming on at the end of September, Dr. Shabnam Daskar, and we'll be talking about brain health. We've got a lineup. I'll be sort of putting out the entire schedule, but thank you, Charlie, so much for being here. And thank you, everyone who was here. And I hope you stay tuned with both Charlie and I. All right, everyone, take care.
Bye now.